Welcome, everybody. It is Monday, which means it's Zen Money Monday. And today I'm talking with my friend, Kristen Zavo. Kristen and I met. She's another author, and she has a really, I think, interesting background in that she spent a lot of time in the corporate world, in the very kind of nitty-gritty financial management world, big business world. And now she is working on her own, helping people get really clear from a career standpoint, from a, is this really what you want to do standpoint, among other things. So I appreciate having you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
I know, me too. Let's dig into the behind the scenes stuff.
Yes.
So can you give us a little bit of a background into, what your history was before you moved into the entrepreneurial space to start?
Yes, absolutely. So I spent nearly 2 decades in traditional corporate roles. So I did some teaching. I spent some time in investment banking, nearly a decade in financial consulting. I helped companies that were going bankrupt. So you might recognize Tower Automotive or Lehman Brothers would be a really big one. I was the team that came in, the team of Grim Reapers, when the bankruptcy was going to happen, but we got them through. Not Lehman Brothers.
But that's a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole nother podcast. We can, for your derivative finance nerds, we can talk about that another time. But after that, I started thinking, okay, what else do I want to do? And I ended up completely changing careers to a marketing strategy, customer experience role at a major retailer. And that big career change, I didn't know it then, was sort of the beginning of what would be my career coaching and what I would ultimately turn into a full-time business. Because, whenever you're making a career change, very well-meaning people tell you, no, it's not possible. You've got to start at the bottom. You're too far out. But that's where I really learned, okay, what do you need to do to change careers? How do you articulate your story? How do you connect the dots for someone so it does make sense? And even you could argue you're a better fit than the person who has the traditional experience. So then I spent some time in corporate, and then I wrote the book, and then I'm like, I need to follow my own advice and do this full time. This is what I love. And so here we are. And right now I'm a career coach, and I help unfulfilled high achievers to find work and build careers they love. Whether that means staying put, getting a new job, changing careers, or even turning their side hustle into a full-time gig.
I have so many different questions. I'm trying to figure out how to layer them for you. Okay, so first and foremost, let's talk about the business building side for yourself now. And then I want to work backwards, because I think your experience, even from the get-go, in terms of, I think there's some nuggets to share around what you see as the Grim Reaper for business owners as well. So I want to touch back on that, but we won't start there. So
yes, let's start with happy things.
Let's start with happy things. So how was it after being in, you're a cog in a wheel, as much as you may love that traditional version of bigger business, to stepping out on your own? What was the biggest hurdle for you?
I did not enjoy being a cog in the wheel. I found a journal entry from like a few months before I quit. I ended up quitting my consulting job without another job. And I found a journal entry, and it like literally said those words: I don't want to be one of many. I need the freedom, to think for myself and do things my way and actually care about what I do and make an impact. And it was like this whole thing. And now looking back, it's like, duh. But it's kind of cute to look back on. My younger self knew that she didn't want to be, because in consulting, you come in with a team of consultants. You're an associate, a senior associate, a director, and there's like a million of you. And you do what needs to be done, but you don't have control over the work you do. It's literally whatever needs to be done in a bankruptcy. And sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's miserable. I remember looking at my bosses, looking at managing directors who were, making millions, and they would be on the phone with the phone company arguing about how to split the bill pre and post bankruptcy. And I remember looking at them and saying, I don't want that. No way.
I don't want to be making millions and having that be my day.
No, I mean, sure, the millions, but like that day in and day out was not at all appealing to me. And that, there's a tip, right? If you look at your boss and you don't like what they're doing, out. You need to look at something else. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. What was it? Did you have when you made the leap? Because I think I myself have changed. Many of us changed careers and jobs and all that kind of stuff. And I definitely have done I'm leaving before I have something else lined up in the past.
That's courageous. Not everyone
when I was young and didn't have any, anybody else attached to me, and it could be foolish like that. But it's not an easy thing to do. Did you just get to a point where you're like, I'm done? Or did you plan that out being like, all right, I know that there's something better down the line. I'm fascinated by people's sort of conscious versus unconscious motivations around those decisions.
Yeah, I had been talking about it for years. So I should have left like 4 years prior.
Oh, yeah.
And so I knew I wasn't happy. I was overwhelmed. I was burnt out. I would sit in these meetings and like not really care about the topic. It's not something I'd go home, and talk about with my friends. And, work was just taking up such a big part of my life. I was working easy 78-hour work weeks, which now that seems like, how is that even possible? But work was my life. And when I first started getting those inklings, I had a breakdown at age 30, like what a joke now, but I was 30. I had turned 30 that day. And then that night I woke up in the middle of the night. I was hysterically crying. This is not where I was meant to be. I imagined things so much different. And in my little mind then, by 30, you're supposed to have it figured out. I know better now. You never have it figured out. For anyone who's listening.
Self-inflicted, type of expectations we bring.
Yeah.
Sure.
And
Where were you living at that point?
I was living in New York City in a high-rise apartment. Like I had all the things. I was making good money. I should have been happy. And so when I had that breakdown, I knew this wasn't it, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I was in finance. I had all the restructuring certifications you could imagine, plus an MBA in finance. And so what I did was I said, I'll go get my CFA. So that's a chartered financial analyst. That is like worse than an MBA. For anyone that doesn't know, it's self-study. It's like a 30% pass rate. You don't have a life while you're studying. It's just the most miserable test ever. Sure. And I went through all that, which takes a minimum of 3 years.
It's medical school for the financial people.
Oh, it was the worst. And yet, I felt good. I was taking action, but I didn't want to do finance anymore. But I didn't stop to say, what do I really want to do? All I did was like, if I have this other certification, it's really hard. It's impressive. I'll get another job. Maybe I'll make more money. I'll be happier. But I didn't stop and say, wait a minute, what do I actually want to do? And so to answer your question, you said, how long did you know? Did you just quit? No, I spent years, just spinning my wheels, going in directions that made no sense. And then guess what happens when you do that? When you ignore that voice inside you, you get sick.
Right.
So then I was getting terrible migraines and I was, crying in church, like all these just horrible things. But they, if we don't listen to that inner voice, our body is going to revolt until we do.
Yeah.
So it took years. I can't give myself the credit that I was like, I quit and I'm done and I left.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many parallels in our stories, but I hear this from a lot of people as well. I think many of us, we get trained early on to be on some version of, you get the next cherry on the tree.
Yeah,
right.
Keep climbing the ladder.
Whatever version that is, whether that's big business or small business or, the next educational point of view or whatever it might be. But then it's followed by the I can't listen, I'm not listening to the point where my body finally freaks out enough in one way or another so that I have to listen. And that's when things start to kind of devolve and shift and, change happens. So I understand.
Yeah.
Did you always know that were you actually interested in finance when you originally got into it, or did you fall into your first job too?
So in undergrad, I went for psychology and I went for marketing. So I went through all the business courses only because it was a prerequisite to marketing. Okay. So my first loves were marketing and psychology. And of course now, I have my own business and I get to do marketing and branding and psychology. I get to help people to be happier. So I ended up where I'm supposed to be. But at the time that the marketing and psychology seemed like it was something that I was interested in, but it wasn't, a logical, reasonable thing.
It's like getting an English degree, right?
Yes. And so the economy wasn't good. And so I went back and I got my MBA. And I remember an advisor telling me when I was talking to her about different options to focus on my MBA. And she's like, but you're really good at numbers. I had a math minor. she's like, you're really good at numbers. I think you should do finance. And I was like, well, I am. And then it's like, I'm proving something to someone, right? And I was great at numbers. And guess what? There's always jobs for people who can do numbers. And so that like took off the trajectory of, you know, then I got my MBA, I went into investment banking, then consulting, and just a huge percentage of my life spent on finance, which I'm good at. I enjoy now that I'm not doing it full time, but I was in Excel like for 10 hours a day plus.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love numbers, but I love people and, you know, and experience way more.
What are the differences? So we moved out of this sort of, we're going to come in and try and, you know, clean up the pieces after the shit hits the fan in big business, which is an education in of itself, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then you move into this back more into the sort of softer side of things. How was that transition?
There were a lot of good things. I was definitely moving in the right direction. There's a little bit more balance gender-wise, right? Like in finance, I was most of the time the only woman. It was very, you know, just very, I don't like the word masculine energy, but very much you do what I say because I'm here, right? Versus collaborative. And so it was nice to move from there. And numbers were a huge part of my job. I was, you know, doing product development and strategy, and customer experience is not just having flowers near the door of a store, right? But there's a lot of statistics and a lot of market research. So I still got my numbers fixed, but in a way that I could see where it ended and how it impacted people. And I could tie myself to a vision that, you know, meant more to me.
Right.
So, so that was great. I actually cared about it. Like I can walk into, say, an Anthropologie versus, I don't know, even a Nordstrom, right? Like you take two very nice stores and it's a completely different experience, right? And this is why I liked this role, or why I gravitated towards it, because I had an opinion. I would notice the small things, like, you know, when they offer, you know, your man a drink so he can sit down and relax while you can be free to shop, right? The way they greet you or don't, all the little things that just make an experience, you know, wonderful. I noticed. And so I loved it for a lot of those reasons. And still, it was a big company. When I left, we were undergoing a big restructuring. There were layoffs like every few months for years. There's still, it's been years since I've been gone, and there's still every few months, there's a massive layoff.
Which is majorly stressful as an employee.
Yes.
No matter how good you are at your job, you're constantly wondering if you're going to get pink slipped.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's bad for so many reasons. So you're in this constant state of heightened stress, right? That fight or flight. And then you don't work well with others because you're afraid you got to keep all the information to yourself or else they won't need you. Right. And so then people are backstabbing each other. I mean, it was just a terrible environment. And actually I have a few clients who are still there now. And, you know, it's the same situation. It's bad. So when I went there was so much more that was good. I was headed in the right direction. But ultimately it was not a healthy place to stay, for sure.
Well, and it sounds like, you know, part of that actually benefited you because it allowed you to morph into building your own business.
Exactly.
So now when you're coaching people, do you find yourself, two questions. One, I'm curious how it affects you being this sort of solo support person for people who are still in that space. How does that feel for you? Because I imagine there's ups and downs about.
Well, I love it.
Living in that world, but not living in that world.
For me, it's actually all ups.
Oh, good. Perfect.
Yeah, it doesn't take me back in emotionally, if that's what you mean. But I can, like, there are some career coaches who are even my friends who've never had a corporate job, right? And so when people work with me and they're coming from corporate, like, I get it. I was there. I had a cubicle, like I was under fluorescent lights for so many hours a day. Like I get it on a level that not everyone can get. And so I can see the pros and cons, and I'm not about having everyone quit their jobs. Some people actually end up, you know, turning their current job into their dream job. But I think it helps me connect on a different level when you've actually experienced something. And then also understand, like, what can you really do to make a change in your current role versus what the books say, but you know you would never go to your boss and, I don't know, demand to work from home full time, right? Like whatever the books say, like I also know what is reality, what are politics. So I think it's all good. And if they do decide to leave, I've been there, done that, right? Whether it's starting a business, whether it's changing careers. So I think it's all good.
Yeah, no. And I think it's really great that people like you are out there doing that kind of work, because it's like anything, whether it's learning, how to manage your own business, or learning, self-help of any kind, or just trying to navigate these really tough, tricky situations that we find ourselves in our human experience. I know many people, myself included, who get very excited in new ideas and in reading, but it's so easy to get excited and then the implementation doesn't happen for one reason.
That's why you hire a coach.
But that's why you hire somebody to help you stay on track and walk through, so that if it really is an important thing for you to figure out, then there's some accountability and there's some opportunity. It's like doing yoga at home for yourself versus going to a class or something like that.
Yeah. And reflection is great. And it's so important. I don't want people to take action for action's sake, like I did when I got my CFA, right? That wastes a whole lot of time and energy and sets you up for failure. But while all that reflection is important, action is also important, because you get more clarity through action, right? Yeah, and you're actually moving in the right direction. So
let's talk a little bit about you building your business, because you've been on your own for a couple of years at least, if not more, right? Yeah. How are you finding that experience especially with this sort of marketing, branding background most recently? Are you finding it? What's the biggest hurdle about sort of getting your business up and running in the way that you want it to be?
I'm lucky because I find business fun, especially when it's something, when it's for a cause I actually care about. I think a lot of coaches, they get into coaching and they forget about the business part. And, at least half of your work, probably more if we're honest, is about the business. So luckily I love that, right? That's what I went to undergrad and grad school, were both a form of business. And I did love helping businesses get out of bankruptcy. I didn't love all of it, but I did love that component. So I do like the business. As far as the biggest challenge, I think I want to do all the things, Liz. I want to do all the things, and I think really having the restraint to focus. Where can I go deep? Where can I, really make a difference in this one area, and then maybe expand, right? So I'm online, so I've got the social media, right? I do speaking events, I do workshops, podcasts, right? Interviews, things like that, and saying, okay, what is my main focus? And then what can be an addition? I mean, when you first start in your business, even with social media, I mean, this, you can't be everywhere. Right?
But boy, do we want to try.
We want to. Like, I've been forever, I've been pushed to get on YouTube, and I'm like, yeah. Right. But it was even to do now, I do a weekly show, every Monday. It's called Morning Joy. I love it. It's so much fun. But even that, like, until I was ready to do it, it was just going to be an extra thing. So I think the shiny object syndrome and being interested in all the things is probably my biggest challenge. I want to hear yours. Am I allowed to ask you a question?
Yeah, of course. I wish you would. People don't ask me questions as much, which is great. Like, it's perfect. Probably something similar. I think, when you're somebody who loves learning, being in the entrepreneurial business owner space is a fantastic place, because there's always something new to challenge yourself with. So finding some balance between that drive and that urge, which is a very kind of external energy, if we want to talk energy, of like, what else can we be doing? What can we add on, kind of stuff, and marrying it with what's really realistic. Because if you're anything like me, it's super easy to just be like, I'll just work 24/7.
Yeah.
Because one, like, as everyone knows, right, I have chronic health issues, so that's stupid. But two, like, I have kids, I have a family,
you have a life.
I shouldn't be doing that, but I get very addicted to all of it. And it's super easy. It almost becomes especially with social media, it becomes very much an addictive, like, I got to check, I got to respond, I have to, And so for me, I think right now, and it changes, like the things that I struggled with in the beginning of going out on my own are very different than the things I struggle with now. But I think mostly I struggle with now is my own time management. management of self stuff in terms of remembering that I want other things in my life.
Yeah.
Because it's just so easy to play in the business space. And it doesn't necessarily always drive your business either. I mean, I see plenty of people who like spend hours and hours and hours and everything's beautiful and great. But at the end of the day, and part of my job with my clients is to say, not only what are we spending actual money on, but how are you also spending your time energy, right? I mean, it's all related. And if we give our time value, then, we don't want to be saying one thing and doing something else, which is, I think, a lot of your work too, of helping people become very genuine around their desires and their actions, right?
Yeah. I mean, so many great points there. And I think the one I'll highlight is just that, to be in integrity with your work is the most important thing. So if I am helping people to build careers they love, and for me, it's not just about the job, it's how that job supports the rest of their life. And so if I'm helping people do that and I'm encouraging them to take care of themselves, to, make time for the relationships that are most important, to have time for creativity, all of that in addition. And if I'm burning out and working crazy hours and not living a life, then there's a disconnect there. And people can feel that, right? You sort of touched on energy. And if you want to go down that path, I'm totally cool with that, by the way. But yeah, I mean, energetically, people can sense that. And I think one of the best ways to decide if you want to work with a coach is to say, okay, looking at their life, do you want that, right? Because they're going to help you build what they're building themselves. Even if it's not conscious, we do, right? Because we're teaching what works for us. And so if you look at a coach and they're overworked and they're overwhelmed and they're burnt out, then I would pause and say, okay, is that what I want? Especially if you're a business owner and you're getting a business coach. That is so important.
Right. Yeah, I think there's often a disconnect, wrapping it back around to sort of the external messaging. I've talked about this in the past too. It's often things can look very shiny and exciting, and we can dive into FOMO around, and this has a direct impact on our bottom line and its health.
Yeah.
In terms of working with particular people who may be great, but it also, one, it may not be the right time for you. And two, a lot of times what looks great on the surface in this very, fast moving social media world of, we just get little snippets of what appears to be like an entire life full of beauty.
Yeah.
The reality is, a lot of times those businesses are a crapshoot on the backside, and they're not.
Oh, Liz,
right?
Yes.
I mean, business building is hard. It's not a pretty process. There's a little bit of blood and guts that goes along with it, and that includes ups and downs. So I think the biggest thing is navigating, recognizing that. And everybody has those moments where it's like, oh, I went too far the other way. Like I pendulum swing a lot, right? Where I'm like, this is great, and then I go to like, oh, I've been doing too much, I've been pushing, and then again, like things maybe don't flow the way I'd like them to, or I'm not getting the same kind of leads because I'm pushing too hard, and then it kind of comes back to the center, and then maybe it goes a little too far the other way in terms of laissez-faire, right? So I think we're always just navigating that kind of back and forth a little bit. But if we can have an eye toward a concrete, conscious balance with a strong foundation within the business itself, we're far more likely to be successful.
We get to choose every day.
Yeah. That's the fun part too, right? To remind ourselves that says, hey, especially if you're a person who has stepped out of a traditional 9-to-5 position, presumably we're doing it so that we can have more flexibility, that we're not chained to our desks. And it's amazing to me how many of us unconsciously recreate that exact same scenario and then some when we're building a business.
Wow. I mean, when I was changing careers, so when I quit that consulting job that I told you, I was working like easily 12 to 15-hour days. And then I didn't have a job. So I quit. So my job was looking for my new job. I would get up and I'd still go to 5 a.m. Barry's boot camp in New York City. And then I would get right at it, right? And I had a whole plan and everything I was going to do. And I was still working, maybe not 15-hour days, but I was still working 9-10-hour days. And I remember having
all of your mental energy too.
Well, yeah. And I didn't have a boss anymore telling me to do that. And so I had to look at, okay, some of this was the environment I was in, right? But I was definitely a recovering workaholic where that was what I knew. And so even left to my own devices, I was still doing that. And so even when I have clients that are looking for a job, I say 4 hours, even if that's your full-time job, 4 hours is more than enough, assuming you don't have a job. And then I need you to get the rest of your life right. I need you to be taking care of yourself. I need you to be putting in, those self-care practices, those foundational things. But yeah, it's so true. It's a habit we get into. And I think just being busy, it is on the same level as being addicted to other things, right?
Oh, for sure. It's all of that very adrenaline charge, like let's live on cortisol to get through the day kind of stuff. And when you're addicted to that physically, you will go to amazing lengths if you don't have the wherewithal to check yourself and pay attention to what's happening to recreate that even when you don't need to. Like I have a very hard time, even with all the work that I've done over the years and like my body being like, you will rest. I have a very hard time shutting it off. Even though I know intellectually how important it is, I know it's ridiculous, like that I can't just keep go, go, go. But I know a lot of people who have a very hard time turning it off once it's been turned on. How have you transitioned that for yourself? Because you're right, being unintentionally addicted to 12 to 15 hour work days, you don't just flip the switch and be like, now I can just, it's good.
Yeah. And this is something that a lot of my clients come to me with too. So, what I tell them is the same thing, that I've done for myself. I think, setting your own boundaries and rules with yourself. I think if you are an entrepreneur, asking yourself, are you being a good boss? How's your boss treating you? Right.
Right.
And I know for me, even if it is a late night, if I don't stop by 8 p.m., I know that my brain is going to keep working while I'm sleeping. So like that is and I don't work till 8 p.m. most nights, but if I'm going to work late, that is like the cutoff. Because otherwise I just keep thinking all night. I think having a life outside of work is also huge. Like, I'm trying to think, we had date night. It was Saturday night. And if it weren't for the fact that we had date night planned, I needed to be in the shower by 4, I was traveling last week, so I was working this Saturday. But like, I looked at John and I'm like, thank God you planned date night because I would have kept working. So like having a life, really, just like if you had a corporate job, I, recommend that people actually make plans after work because number one, it makes you more productive, right? Because if you have to leave, you're going to be more productive. Yeah. It helps you set the boundary because you have somewhere to be, right? Otherwise you're going to lose the tickets or have to pay for whatever it is. And it also, it gets you more respect, right? We think if we work so hard, if we, do whatever the boss says that, it's going to make it better for us, but it doesn't. Then just people walk all over us and we're the ones they give the extra work and we're taken advantage of. So, and I think also spending quiet time. And I'm sure, Zen is in both of your books. I'm sure you talk about meditation and that quiet time with yourself, really connecting with that inner voice, which many times busyness is, I've seen it even defined as like a lack of intimacy with self. Meaning that if we keep really busy, we're not going to hear that voice in our head, right? And when many people start that practice, the feels come up, right? They get emotional. They don't know why. And it's because they haven't stopped. And so I think, really developing a practice of that every single day is also crucial.
Yep. Yeah, my equation to that from the money conversation is always around, we can spend a lot of time in this external, messaging, client getting, doing the work piece of it. But if we don't actually stop and assess and spend some quiet time, with we have this beautiful, our numbers give us a beautiful opportunity to see what is exactly happening and to be able to point to that work that didn't work. And that can very much guide us in a very meaningful way. But often we don't want to look at it because it's just more fun to spin our wheels, throwing up posts or, whatever we might be doing, which can be effective. But there's this whole other deeper part, from a business building standpoint, as well as, just as human beings, I think we should give ourselves that space because it's important.
It's huge. And I think for me, one little reframe is that, where there's a spectrum of human beings, right? Some of us need to get motivated, but we're more on the lazy side. Many of us entrepreneurs, you and me, what we're talking about, we're doers, we're achievers, and we're on the workaholic side. So if you have a propensity to be a workaholic or to be addicted to your busyness and your to-do list, then I would argue quiet time is part of your work.
Yeah.
And if that helps you to do it because now you consider it work, then that's fine. But like, it's crucial. And if you could just have that quiet time, you're going to be so much more efficient. You're going to be so much more connected. You're not going to have to push as hard to get the content out or, you know, in your conversations with potential clients. But still, even though I know that, right, it's easy to get wrapped up in the to-do list. So I think,
of course,
like we were saying before, it's a choice every single day.
For sure. Well, I appreciate all those insights. I want to be cognizant of your time. I ask everybody this question on these episodes. I'm curious. The concept of is easy. It's okay. Any answer is the right answer. Tacos. That might not be. We'll find a way to make this the right answer to the question. What does Zen money mean for you?
Let's see. The first thing that popped to mind is, you know, we all have ideas about money, right? We all have a lot of negative connotations too, right? What does money mean? Does it mean greed? Does it mean, you know, striving? And that doesn't mean hard work. But I think if you can get to a peaceful place with your money, if you can see how your money can, you know, help you make the change that you're meant to make, right? And really have a positive impact in the world, and have a peaceful, zenful, I don't know if that's a word, a zenful relationship with your money. I think that's a key component to just success and fulfillment and, you know, getting to do what you love and, you know, making just a huge difference in this world. So that's my answer. And tacos. And buy lots of tacos.
And tacos. I mean, you're getting everything in one shot, right? I mean, we have pretty much the entire food group in one nice handheld pocket. So
exactly.
Money too. And money is tacos. Perfect. I know I said we were wrapping up, but I want to ask one other question that may like totally derail us here. But how much is financial fear a conversation with you and your clients and their considerations around career
Liz,
or jumping? Is that a major part of what you're talking about?
It is so huge.
I assume so, and I forgot to get into it earlier. So let's talk about it.
You want to talk about synchronicities? Guess what the topic of today's Morning Joy was?
I missed it. Tell me. Money.
The link between money and career happiness.
Yeah.
How much do you need? Is that enough? What else do you need? If you actually liked your job, would you need less money? And, you know, I mean, I told you when I was in consulting, I was making very good money. If I had stuck with it, it would have been, even at just one more level up, to make $500,000 a year would have been like normal and fine. And I had the lifestyle, I had the money. And yet I was so miserable and my life was empty and I didn't have time to date and find my person. I didn't have time or energy for friends. I was lonely and unhappy. And so all the money in the world, it didn't make a difference. And in fact, I think it really tightened the golden handcuffs even more, because when we're unhappy, what do? Right? Some of us eat, some of us drink, some of us go on vacation or to fancy spots. For me, I like to shop. I'm like, if I'm going to be miserable, I might as well have my Louboutins on, right? And so guess what? When you're happy at work, you don't need the shoes. You don't need to party. But when we're unhappy, we create this lifestyle to compensate for the job we hate. And now we have this lifestyle to support. So now we're stuck in this job we hate and we really can't get out. So it's just this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't need all that money if you actually enjoyed your work, enjoyed your life. And, you know, I believe that you can love your job and you can make great money. And that is just something that for some reason, you know, this society and how we grew up, like no one wants to believe that. It's like you have to choose one or the other, right? And that is simply not the case. And so even, you know, if you have listeners who they don't believe me right now, that's fine. I would say put that belief to the side. And what if just for funsies, you know, just play along, a little experiment. What would you do if money weren't your driving factor? Like just allow yourself to play and experiment and be curious. And I'm willing to bet then if there's something in there that really gets you fired up and excited, there is a way to make really good money at that. I mean, I see people making, you know, $1 million businesses off crafting. So like there is nothing, in my opinion, but even if you don't believe it, just suspend that belief for now. What would you do if money weren't your driving factor? Because money's not going to be enough.
No,
it wasn't for me.
It's not.
No,
of course
it's
it's
a
not.
component, of course. I mean, we want enough money to feel safe, right? To not have to go crazy checking prices at the grocery store, to do the things we want to do. But it's, it's much less than we think. I mean, you remember that study from, I think it was 2010. So it's a little dated now.
I think they updated it too. It was like 90,000 back in the day, and now it's like a low 100, like 110, 120 is like sort of like anything above and beyond that. Money does not equate to happiness.
Exactly.
Which, can seem like a lot of money, especially when you maybe have left a traditional job where you're making good money and you're on payroll and you've got perks and all of that. And then you move into this like, oh, I see the possibility in my business around the actual revenue potential. But now I'm struggling to actually go from point A to point B, right? Especially in those first, let's say 3 to 5 years. It can be very hard to continue navigating that because it's a lot of work. I mean, I would argue that it's far more work to move into the entrepreneurial space than it is to maintain a job. That being said, I think it's also can be way more healthy than sitting in that cycle you were talking about where, you kind of hate your life and you try to placate it by, buying fancy things and then have huge credit card bills that further stress you out and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I think, I think there's a way to do things more easily and with more grace. I don't recommend my clients quit their job and go full-time in their business. We have a plan. We have a transition plan.
Here, jump and see what happens. That's never a good idea from a strategy. I think both Kristen and I can agree on that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's no good. Thank you for diving back into that with me. We'll have to have you on again at some point. We'll talk more about
I would love that.
Business building.
So many topics we could talk about.
I know. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully everybody can catch this episode and share it, and we'll be back next week. But thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I know what I forgot to ask. Where can people find you, Kristen? What would be the best way to connect?
So my website is findyourjobjoy.com. And if we have any entrepreneurs listening, and if you like that topic of personal branding and how can you sell more of your services by being more of yourself, then I'd love to give you a copy of my personal branding class for entrepreneurs. So you can just email me, and in the topic, in the headline, put personal branding class, and I'll send it to you. My email, which we can also type in the comments, is Kristen@findyourjobjoy.com.
Perfect. We'll put all of that in the show notes, and everyone can connect with Kristen. She's got a lot going on. As I said, your background, I think, is it's brought you to a really interesting place in your business, which is why I always like talking to you. So thank you for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much.